West Ham's 4-3 defeat at home to Tottenham on the 4th of March 2007 had left Alan Kirbishley and his side facing the very real prospect of relegation. With just 9 games of the season remaining, United were sitting bottom of the Barclays Premiership and 10 points from safety, with just 20 points from 29 games on the board. Edgar Magnussen's decision to fire Alan Pardew and replace him with Kirbs after a record run of consecutive defeats appeared to have backfired. That was until a massive slice of luck and a referee's assistant called Jim Devine provided the inspiration to change the course of United's season. With West Ham trailing 1-0 at Blackburn in game 30 of the season, Devine flagged for a controversial penalty after Carlos Tevez had been felled in the box. If Blackburn were cross at that decision, they were apoplectic by the time Devine decreed that Bobby Zamora's effort had crossed the goal line. It had actually been prevented from doing so by Carlos Tevez. Wins in games 31 and 32 against Middlesbrough and in spectacular style at Arsenal, thanks largely to Rob Green, gave the Hammers renewed hope. But a crushing 3-0 defeat at Sheffield United in match 33, followed by a 4-1 reversal at home to Chelsea, left West Ham still 5 points behind Sheffield United in 17th and with just 4 games of the season left to play. But West Ham were to survive by virtue of winning all of their final 4 fixtures of the season. Bobby Zamora's Perla gave the Irons a 1-0 win over Everton, before Luis Boamorte inspired a 3-0 win at fellow strugglers Wigan. The final home game of the season saw Bolton sent packing on the wrong end of a 3-1 hammering, before Carlos Tevez's only goal of the game gave West Ham a 1-0 win at league champions Manchester United, despite calls of send them down from the home fans. That result, combined with Sheffield's defeat at home to Wigan, saw West Ham stay up, although in the end a draw would have been enough, and the Blades relegated. Carlos Tevez's involvement was to eventually cost West Ham in excess of £40 million due to a scandalous decision by Lord Griffiths, but that will never detract from what was, quite possibly, the greatest escape of them all.
We've just done probably the greatest escape, greater than what's ever been done before, I think. Tempered with the fact, but no, we shouldn't have been there. And let's hope we never go there again.
I'm delighted to be joined today on KUMB TV by Daniel Hurley, who is the author of a new book entitled The Greatest Escape, a review of West Ham's 2006-2007 Premiership season, which you can see here, featuring this delightful pixel art on the cover. The book, all 352 pages of it, takes an often humorous look back at one of the club's most unforgettable campaigns in living memory, in which Alan Kirbish's West Ham somehow survived the looming spectre of relegation, despite being all but dead and buried at one stage. Having looked condemned to the drop following a poor opening half of the campaign and humiliating defeats away to the likes of Reading and Charlton, managed, of course, by former West Ham boss Alan Pardew, the Hammers produced the closest thing you may ever get to a footballing miracle, by winning 7 of the last 9 matches of that season to survive on the final day of the campaign. And of course, the drama wasn't solely consigned to the football field, with the season including the most bizarre double signing in the club's history, which you can see behind me, plus a plethora of legal action thrown into the mix, and not to mention the sale of the club to new owners. Daniel, welcome to KUMB TV. How are you doing?
I'm not too bad, thanks, Graeme. Thanks for having me on.
It's lovely to have you on, buddy. The 2006-2007 season, it was the very best and the very worst of times, you might say. But why did you decide to write a book about that specific year rather than perhaps a more successful campaign such as 1985-86 or perhaps more recently 2015-16?
Well, it's probably a West Ham fan in nature that the bad times are almost more memorable. Yeah. But yeah, the idea for the book came about, literally we were out walking with my kids one day. My youngest son, Adam, asked if I could tell him like a football story and something real that had happened, because I'm 36, been going to West Ham since 92. So I've got a fair bit of experience in real life. I was just sort of thinking, what would they find interesting? And this season came up in my mind. I've got quite a good head for memorising fixtures, especially back then. It's kind of, as I was telling my 2 kids and about it, I realised kind of how insane it was and how many almost like natural punchlines came across the season. Like, I'm sure we'll get into it, but, we go away to Charlton, have to win. lose 4-0, like 3-2 up in the last minute against your biggest rivals, lose 4-3. My boys enjoyed it to the extent I was like, I can't believe no one had ever written a book about it. Because I actually went home and checked, and I thought if there is one, I'd actually quite like to read it, and no one had. Obviously, there's millions of articles about Tevez and what happened there, but not necessarily about the whole thing, because there was so much more than that. So the idea came about then, really.
Okay, and of course, you're not an author by trade. You work in a different sector altogether.
Yeah.
So is this something you've been looking to do for a while? You've sort of had the idea of writing a book, and this was the thing that sort of popped into your head at that time, or did you have other things in mind?
Yeah, no, it's been a lifelong ambition of mine to write a book. Like literally from when I was like 8, 9, 10 years old, I'd sort of sit and try and think. I'd try and write little stories or about football and what have you. And then, like a lot of people back in March last year, furlough hit. And it kind of for the first time in my adult life, I had nothing to do. Of the day. So I thought, well, it's now or never. So kind of I had this idea in my head, so sat down and tried to do it, and sort of 5 hours a day, 6 days a week later, it was done. And the guys at Pitch Publishing pleasingly showed an interest in the project, and we managed to get it out there.
Yeah, and I'm glad you have, because it's a really good read for anyone.
Well, thank you very much.
Looking for something to fill those hours, should we say, those long furloughed hours that many people are still experiencing. I would thoroughly recommend it. But anyway, we're going to go through that season now. I think we'll have a little chat about some of them. I mean, we could be here for hours, couldn't we, quite frankly, because it was just the most bizarre season from the first minute. And of course, we went into that year in a really good position. We'd finished the previous season 9th, I think it was, in the Premiership under Alan Pardew, having come up for the Championship the year before. FA Cup finalists, of course, moments away from beating the European champions in the FA Cup. And then, of course, I can't even say his name, but we all know what happened there anyway. And then,
still hurts.
Yes, it does. It does. So the 2006-2007 season, as I said, we went into it plenty of hope. The transfer policy was a little bit unusual, though. I mean, it seemed a little bit lopsided, and in some ways there's a parallel with what we have, perhaps not now with David Moyes, but prior to David Moyes, in that, there was no real sort of consistency, was there, in that policy?
No, I think for newer fans, the nearest one that you could probably put it towards would be the first year in the London Stadium, having left Upton Park, where rather than, because again, going into Europe like we were that season, kind of looking, when we really needed 2 or 3 world-class players, we bought sort of 8 or 9 potentially could be okay players.
Yeah.
So for your Gokhan Tours and what have you, then there were John Pansils in 2007.
That's it, yeah.
And the club just seemed to, rather than go for quality, sort of went for quantity. And seldom with us does that ever work, it seems.
Yeah, and saying that, though, it seemed to have worked fairly well on the opening day of the season, because, of course, we started the season that year with a pretty decent win against someone that would come back to haunt us later in the season.
Yeah, good 3-1 win at home to Charlton. Carlton Cole, whatever happened to him. So I think scored within a minute. I think his first or second touch of the ball, coming on a sub, and everything looked quite rosy. Yeah. And little did we know what was to come. Yeah, and of course, after that, it sort of all started to go a bit tits up, didn't it? I mean, a few draws, and I'm not sure how it was and how long it was until we won the next game. I've actually got all the games here. I'm not remembering off the top of my head any of this. Before anyone thinks I've got some kind of photographic memory, I do have all the results here. But draws at Watford, defeat at Liverpool. I think Bobby Zamora scored that day, didn't he? Yeah.
Villa. It always seems to me like we always used to draw 1-1 with Aston Villa like every game for about 10 years, and that one was no exception. And of course, the Uefa Cup. We were in the Cup by dint of finishing runners up to Liverpool in the FA Cup earlier in the year, and it didn't really go quite to plan, did it?
No, like so many of our our European excursions. At least it wasn't the Romanian team that time, but. I think when you hear, obviously, a lot of teams talking about the amount of games they ever have to play in this cup, we never seem to play more than 2. So it's never really a massive issue for us. To be fair, I think we were given a massively hard draw. I mean, that was a good Palermo team. I think they come 5th in Serie A the year before. So whereas a lot of English teams seem to get, your random teams from Eastern Europe, we had to play like a top level team early on. I think in my research for the book, actually, I saw their manager said it could have actually been a quarter final or semi final, such was the strength of the two teams.
Yeah, I remember doing the draw at the time, and you looked at the list of teams, and as you say, there was a lot of sort of East European teams in there that would have been a fairly easy route to the group stage. And I remember when the draw was made, looking at that and thinking that was probably one of the 2 or 3 toughest teams you could have possibly drawn, because as you say, Palermo were a good side back then, and did reasonably well. Just finished outside the Champions League places in Italy. And then, of course, it all sort of went wrong. A 1-0 defeat at home and a 3-0 defeat in Italy, which again was sort of notable for all the wrong reasons. I think you only touched on that briefly in the book, but there was a lot of trouble out there, wasn't there? But of course, one of the players who was involved in that, or 2 of the players, were these guys behind me. I've sort of stepped forward a little bit too far, because I'm going to go back to the final day of the summer transfer window, which I think was still the 31st of August then.
Yeah, it was.
You talk about it quite a lot in the book, The Greatest Escape, about how you woke up. I think you woke up in the morning and saw something on Sky. Now, as I recall, there was something, Carlos Tevez had his own personal website, and on the night before, on the 30th, there was a small note on there to say that he was coming to England, and no one really noticed it. And then, of course, the following morning, the national media all picked it up, and well, what did you make of it? All of a sudden, West Ham had signed these 2 incredibly great players from nowhere.
So I don't think it's ever been done again to that extent. I don't think there's ever been a transfer as random as such that's ever happened again. Because Tevez had been linked with Chelsea the week before, and certainly had never been mentioned about coming to Upton Park. Mascherano either. So it literally just came out of nowhere. There was no rumours, nothing. And all of a sudden, they're still on our pitch. And I don't think they seem to know where they were either, quite honestly.
Yeah, I think you saw that, didn't you, in the press interview, in the press conference the following week. But again, in the book, you talk about how you watched the World Cup the year before, and you noted both of these players, and thought then that they were going to be really top-class players. And hence, your specific surprise about them turning up at West Ham.
Yeah, well, Mascherano, I think, played every minute of that World Cup in a very good Argentina team. And Tevez was one of 4 forwards. I think it was him, Messi, Crespo, and someone else. Some pretty strong level forward. No, like he was dovetailing with Lionel Messi, a young Messi, but Messi all the same. I think one game Messi had come off the bench, next game Tevez would. So the fact that he'd gone from that to playing for us and playing, with Marvellous Marlon up front. I don't think anybody really expected that. But yeah, I mean, one of my friends, one of my good friends, a fellow West Ham fan, he messaged me that morning to say we'd signed them. And I thought, well, oh yeah, of course we have. Okay, just get back on with my day. And when he said to me, check Sky Sports News, I remember thinking that's a really specific way to continue this joke.
Yeah.
And yeah, and when I saw it, my jaw hit the floor. I mean, but what staggers me, and I do touch on it quite a bit in the book, is just how nobody ever really questioned it. I mean, we were so vague about how the signings happened. It just said they'd signed permanent contracts. That was it. We didn't disclose transfer fees. Obviously, we know now why we didn't. But if you put into context, I think our record fee at the time was, I think, 7 million for Ashton. Mm-hmm. These 2 were probably worth 25, 30 million each, even back then. And nobody ever sort of questioned how we'd done it. It was remarkable, really.
Yeah, of course, there was talk at the time about Kia Drabchian being involved in the club and potentially buying West Ham, and it transpired that they were brought in almost as like a sweetener.
Make way.
For the club. But I mean, regardless, it was an incredible transfer, and I think you're absolutely right to say it's never been repeated on that scale as definitely at West Ham. But
I can't think of any modern day equivalents, really.
No, I don't think there is any. It was just extraordinary, and of course, it didn't quite work out, did it?
No.
Alan Pardew, we spoke about that press conference briefly where, Pardew was sat in between the 2 guys who looked completely mystified and almost didn't know where they were. Pardew didn't look as if he knew why he'd signed these players. I think it was quite clear, wasn't it, that Pardew hadn't been involved in the transfer anyway.
No, I mean, obviously we'd lost Dean Ashton to injury, I think, a couple of weeks prior. But at the time, I think we had 5 strikers without Tevez signing. Off the top of my head, I think we still had Sheringham, Harewood, Zamora, Carlton Cole. We weren't short of strikers.
Yeah.
In the centre of midfield, we'd just gone out and signed Lee Bowyer to go with Rio Coker, Mullins. Again, while they were definite upgrades, they weren't positions that you felt the manager would have gone to the board and said, I need strength, we need to strengthen. When we signed, I think, 8 players, that some were already.
Yeah.
So it clearly wasn't something that he was aware of. I mean, at the time, I remember he said he'd sanctioned it, but whether he did or not, I mean, only he will know, I guess.
Yeah, and of course, that was sort of seen as a pivotal moment by many fans, because it was almost at that moment that everything began to unravel for Pardew. I think there was at the time there were rumours that perhaps he had gotten a little bit big for his boots. And you touch on the book, I think it was Dean Ashton who had a particular reference that the squad, they had a nickname for him, didn't they?
Yeah, apparently, it was an interview he'd done on a radio station. They said the squad referred to him as a chocolate because if he could, he'd eat himself. So. And yeah, it's one thing that Pards, I mean, I've got a lot of time for Pardew and the job he did as West Ham manager in a difficult spell, after we got relegated in 2003, which we never should have, but did. And I think he did a largely very good job. I think through his career, I think this is probably fair to say that quite often he's very, very good when it's going well, and then almost flies too close to the sun in terms of deciding it's always going to be this way. And then it starts to go wrong, and it normally goes very wrong very quickly.
Yeah, I think that's very, very true, actually. I mean, as someone who was involved in the press conferences at the time at the club, you could sense the confidence that was flying through him as the time went on. I mean, let's not forget in his first season at the club, of course, he was very close to being fired when
very close
went wrong. And he was kind of quite a humble manager then. And you look at the pictures when he came to the club after that gardening leave, and he changed, and he definitely changed. And as you say, I think we saw that at Newcastle as well and other clubs. But in terms of results on the pitch, it started to go a little bit wrong. We were dumped, as we touched on earlier, out of the Uefa Cup. And then, of course, the Carling Cup. What a night that was at Chesterfield.
I think that was the night, I don't speak for yourself and tell me if you agree after, but I think that was the night I started to think this was more than just a bad run. Lost 2-1 at Chesterfield, but didn't just lose 2-1. I mean, they absolutely battered us from, I think, about the 5th minute onwards. We scored very early, and you'd think, well, this is okay now. And it was far from it. It was nigh on our best team as well.
Yeah.
I think we had made 2 or 3 changes, and that was all we made. And we couldn't get near them. And I remember thinking then, right, this could be a problem, because Tevez and Mascherano weren't involved that night. It was the bulk of the squad that had done good things the previous year, and they didn't look anywhere near where they'd been the year before. But yeah, I think that was the night, I think myself and a lot of people probably thought this is a problem. We hadn't scored, I think, at that point in 6 games going into that as well. So
yeah, I think it's a fair point there. I think, as I said earlier, there's pivotal points throughout the year that you can point at. The signing of the players was one, and definitely that night at Chesterfield, you thought, this isn't just a blip, this isn't just a bad start. This is a team that's not performing. And that's when I think a lot of people began to question Pardew. Of course, it went from bad to worse. So although there was sort of a little bit of respite, there was a game, I think it was live on TV, wasn't it, against Arsenal?
I think it was, yeah. I was at the game. But yeah, I'm pretty certain. I think it was a Sunday, so I'm pretty certain it would have been.
I think it was. I wasn't at that particular game. I'm sure I remember watching it live on TV. And of course, in the book, you talk about how there'd been a little bit of animosity between Pardew and Wenger prior to that game, and then of course it all kicked off, didn't it? Right at the end when was it Harewood who scored the winning goal? Wasn't it?
Harewood, yeah. And he'd never been the best loser, Wenger. And the clips are out there, but Pardew basically is just celebrating the goal, turns around and Wenger's like in his face. I've never seen anything like it. From someone as well who kind of always fancied himself a little bit as like a cool, calm individual. Go and sort of square up to Pardew for having the audacity to celebrate a last-minute winning goal was curious. I think because Pardew left us quite quickly after, it was not really remembered as much as it could have been.
Yeah.
Like there was never like a return meeting of West Ham and Arsenal with Pardew there. I think had he stayed with us for a couple more years, it probably would have been a bigger and bigger thing. But it wasn't to be, obviously.
Yeah, I actually thought fair play to Pardew in that scenario, because as anyone who's ever met Arsene Wenger knows, he's quite a big chap. And Pardew stood his ground, didn't he?
Big, yeah. Yeah.
I think there was a bit of a size difference there, but Pardew.
I think he might have been overmatched.
But anyway, so we kind of thought that might be the first step to West Ham's sort of recovery. And then, I'm looking at the results again. Defeat at Middlesbrough, lost at Chelsea, narrowly beat Sheffield United, but then defeats at Everton, defeats at Wigan. And then, of course, we have the big one, the one that was really the death knell for Pardew, and a trip to the Reebok Stadium.
The Reebok, yeah.
Our old friend Sam Allardyce. And the night it just all went wrong. I mean, what are your memories of that night?
I remember it quite well. To this day, I still think it's one of the very worst performances I've ever seen from a West Ham team. We've had bigger defeats. I mean, I've seen us lose 5-0, 7-1, 6-0, whatever, but I can't remember many games where the team looked less interested, like less up for the fight. I mean, we all remember what Allardyce's Bolton teams were like, and to beat them, you had to be up for the fight. And it was just pathetic, quite honestly. I remember the team selection was bizarre. I remember we had Christian Daly playing in central midfield, Mascherano not travelling, which I doubt that was in Javier's career plans to be left out in favour of Christian Daly, God bless him. We had Tevez on the wing. We had a left back in central defence while picking a central defender in midfield. It was just an absolute shambles. I mean, 4-0 flat at us, and that's never a good situation to be in. Yeah. And I think it was Pardew's last game. And like I said earlier, I was a massive fan of Pardew, but I think really for any team, when you put in a performance like that, it's difficult to see how the manager stays, because they clearly given up playing for him.
Yeah, it was. As I said, I think that was the game where everyone realised the game was up for Pardew. It was. I think you're bang on. I think the players had absolutely stopped playing for him. Although I'm always find that kind of strange, because these are still professionals we're talking about. Right? You still expect them to give their best, but there was just something about that whole game where we were appalling from start to finish. As you say, the team selection was just, there was no sort of coherence there in terms of his selection policy. I think again you touch in the book about how he was changing the forward line every week to try and find a solution, a defence as well, players playing out of position. You mentioned Carlos Tevez playing on the wing, and it was just a dreadful night. And I think everyone knew at that point that something had to change. Of course, something had changed just prior to that. Upstairs, we had new owners, didn't we?
Yeah, the Icelandic duo, Edgar Magnussen. I'm sure anyone who was around probably remembers him. He, I think I say, a reference in the book, especially in his early days, he was giving more quotes to the media than a bricklayer on a new build estate.
Yeah, good line.
You couldn't get him out of the media, particularly when the previous chairman, Terence Brown, I think most people could have walked past him in the street, wouldn't have known who it was. And then Edgar came in very, very media friendly. Only owned about 5% of the club himself. In reality, it was obviously the money was backed from elsewhere. But all of a sudden we had a very prominent face of the club, which I don't think any of us were used to. And obviously it wasn't to be long term, but at the time they talked a good game.
He did. I mean, I'm going to touch on it a bit later, but I was fortunate enough to interview Edgar at some point during that season, and he actually struck me. It was very interesting, because the public persona of Magnussen was that he was kind of almost like a comedy character, wasn't it? There was that whole thing about the Benny Hill. Do you remember that? People going around slapping him on the head, and him sort of jokingly sort of laughing that off. But as I say, when I met him a while later, I was kind of struck by how much of a steely sort of resolve he had about him, and he was quite a serious character. But anyways. As you say, we had new owners, and they decided pretty quickly that was it. Pardew had to go, and they made a change.
Yeah, and obviously an ex-West Ham player, another Alan, coming in Alan Kirbishley, which at the time was a sensible move, I think. It looked sensible, and obviously he'd had a great 12, 13 years, I think, at Charlton, and had done a great job there. It seemed like a sort of steady pair of hands to get us out of the situation we were in. Obviously hoping for a bit of a new manager bounce, which lasted one game.
Well, we got it, didn't we? We did get it very briefly.
very brief. Yeah.
I think that was another televised game. And but again, talking about the season as a whole, and that game, the memories of that match for me are for all the wrong reasons, because it's not really for West Ham beating Manchester United and achieving that win under Curbs. It was for Nigel Reo-Coker cupping his ear towards the fans.
That was the end of him, I think, at West Ham. I mean, you have to remember as well, obviously we're sitting now in a social media era. That didn't really exist then. You know, like the perceived abuse, I don't know how he'd have been getting it. It was only through the media. You know, media-driven, stories and stuff. Because obviously, as captain, he'd been seen as kind of one of the key antagonists, I guess you'd say, in Pardew leaving. But as fans, we were only really being given what had been fed to us. There wasn't any, ITKs or anyone else out there telling us what had happened in the dressing room. So for Reo-Coker to decide the fans were at fault for, subpar performances for the first 15 games of the season was a strange decision. And I think, sadly, there was no real coming back for him. And in the end, I don't think his career ever really got. He obviously had a good spell at Villa, but I don't think his career really got to where I think most of us thought it would get to.
Well, I mean, at the time he was being linked with the move to Arsenal, wasn't he? And but of course, famously, there was only one other person I think who dared cup his ear at West Ham fans, and that didn't work out too well either, did it? Mr. Allardyce, of course, I'm referring to, following that infamous Hull match a few years later. I do sort of recall quite a bit of criticism for Nigel Reo-Coker on the message boards, especially on the KUMB forum at the time. But you're right. I mean, that was certainly nowhere near the level of sort of personal abuse that they
people now, tweeting at him or whatever,
exactly, where it's direct.
It wasn't a thing. Yeah,
exactly. So there we go. So Curbishley off to a flying start. Little bit of a sour note with the captain, but we won the game. That was the main thing. And then, of course, what was it? How long till the next win?
3 months.
3 months. 3 months. The next win.
Yeah, it was a long 3 months.
I mean, it was a deep dark winter for West Ham. That one, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, everything that you thought Curbishley would bring in as a positive kind of went the other way. You thought we'd be well organised, and we went for a spell of pretty much every corner that a team ever got against us. They either scored or nearly scored. The football was no better, and we weren't getting the desired results of more pragmatic football either. We were just losing every which way. Obviously, bringing in players that then didn't necessarily work or kept getting injured, Lucas Neal and Matt Upson. Obviously, not the manager's fault that, but it certainly wasn't helping. And it just seemed like he couldn't really find a formula, much in the way Pardew had been unable to before it.
Yeah, it was like the perfect shit show in a way, wasn't it? If something could have gone wrong that season, it did. I mean, we only briefly touched on Dean Ashton, of course.
Yeah,
who we would have made a huge difference, I'm sure, had he been available that year. And
enormously, yeah.
Fantastic player. And then, of course, as you say, Lucas Neal, which at the time, I mean, it was nowhere near the level of the Tevez and Mascherano signings. But even then, you sort of, I remember thinking, why has he joined West Ham? I mean, it can only be for financial reasons. Of course, he claimed it wasn't, didn't he?
He turned down Liverpool to come to us, which is unbelievable. And yeah, I loved Neil when he was with us, to be fair. And I think he was a massive reason. Obviously, it was decided in the court that Tevez was the only reason we stayed up. But I think most of us who were actually there know that it was a lot of players. And Lucas Neal was a massive reason we ended up turning that round, in my opinion. Maybe a few others as well, but I'm sure we'll get to that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, he was one of the great West Ham captains in recent years, especially
really
in
was.
the Premier League era. I mean, up there with kind of Kevin Nolan's and perhaps Mark Noble to a degree. Fantastic
I'd agree.
Player and did a brilliant job for us. I remember around that time, sort of during the transfer window, we at KUMB did a piece for Sky Sports, which I'll probably put in over the top of the interview for a few seconds. And they asked us all if we felt we were going to stay up. It was around the 20th of January, and I think there was 4 or 5 of us being interviewed, and we all kind of laughed, even at that stage, at the suggestion that we could avoid relegation. There was one of us, actually, to his credit, Romford, who firmly believed we'd stay up. And it sort of didn't get any better, did it? I mean, we had those 2 pivotal games, I think they were both in January against Reading And Charlton was Reading New Year's Day?
Reading was New Year's Day, yeah. And Charlton was, I think, early February.
I'm just looking down the list. Charlton, 24th of February, so quite a difference between those two. But of course, in between that, we had that. I mean, for me, which was up there with the Bolton game, was the FA Cup game against Watford. Now, of course, Watford, as you mentioned in the book, were having an even worse season than West Ham were. Absolutely looked terrible. And we lost it. We were beaten by them in the FA Cup at home.
Yeah. And then I think 2 weeks later in the league as well.
That's right, yeah. Same score, wasn't it? 1-0 in both?
Yes, 1-0 and 1-0. I think that just summed it up. Worst team in the league by a distance. We just couldn't score a goal. They're holding us off. They held us off so comfortably in the cup game, as you say. And the league game, I think Ben Foster's still taking one of those goal kicks now. He was taking so long to say, it's unbelievable. The Reading game, I think anyone who was there, my poor dad went, and I don't think many of us or many people who were there will ever forget that.
Let's talk about. I just want to talk briefly about. Was it Bob? Is it your dad's friend?
Oh, Barry.
With the coat. Barry.
Loved the coat. Yeah.
Barry, tell us about the coat, because I was chuckling at that particular story and that superstition.
Yeah, well, I'm sure loads of us have our superstitions, and this was going back to the Preston game in the playoff final in 2005. Boiling hot day in May. I'm sure a lot of people who watch this might have been there. And for some reason, poor Barry decided that he couldn't take his coat off, couldn't undo his coat. But apparently, we're all worried about the game's a big game. Oh, Barry's got it sorted, because as long as he doesn't take his coat off, we're going to go up to the Premier League. And just the entire day sweltering it was. We're all stood there, and he's sweating his whatever's off in this massive overcoat that he's decided he has to wear. God bless him.
And of course, because of the luck that obviously brought us that day, it was something that we went assisted with.
Yeah, he clearly wasn't wearing it for a lot of that season. I'll tell you that.
We touched now. Of course, moving forward, we're coming into February now, so we're coming close to the reason really that you sort of wrote the book. It is called The Greatest Escape, and that's really what what it was known as, still considered to be the greatest escape, especially by West Ham fans, of course. But before it began, we went to Charlton, and there was that very interesting game where we had the former Charlton manager managing West Ham, and Charlton had the former West Ham boss managing Charlton. And of course, that one didn't quite go to plan, did it? For us,
absolutely.
Anyway.
Yeah, 3-0 down at half time, wasn't it? I think again. And that was, I think, the game of let's pretend we scored a goal. I think that was where that chant was born. I think that would, if there was any hope, I think for most of us, it probably left that day. I remember by the end not even being that concerned about it, because I thought, well, it's over now. We've got 2 months to get used to the idea and we'll move on. Because we've all seen a lot of 6-pointers that West Ham have been involved in, or other teams, and the team's never 4-0 down in 45 minutes, are they? Or 3-0 down. They're 1-0 games. They're tight, and it just showed that the players really, for whatever reason, it seemed as if there was no fight left. And, I mean, Curbishley was as defeated a manager as anyone I've ever seen after the game as well. Yeah. I think when he already used the phrase, there's still X amount of points left to play for, which for me, as soon as you hear a manager say that, they know they're down. And he's saying it in February. I think probably shows how desperate it was.
Yeah, I seem to remember a lot of perhapses coming out in those press conferences from Curbishley. It seemed to be his sort of buzzword at the time. And I think you mentioned it a few times in the book. Perhaps we can do this, perhaps we can do that. But he definitely looked defeated. And, for us fans who had watched that capitulation at Bolton and thought, well, it can't get any worse than this. We had Reading on New Year's Day, the Watford FA Cup defeat, and now Charlton within 3 months that were as bad as that particular day, weren't they? But it was, fortunately, as bad as it got, because things began to turn around thereafter, although it took another week. Now, of course, the big game, the next game after the Charlton defeat, was one which a lot of West Ham fans now, I think if you ask them, when did you first start to have hope that West Ham might just get out of it, was the following week, and it was a home game against Tottenham.
Yeah, I think he almost in the end sort of fell on the right team as well. I think a lot of us at the time thought Noble should be in, a young Mark Noble, let's not forget. and Tevez going up front as well. He still, at this point, was playing on the wing periodically. And I think it was almost Kirbishley just throwing his hands up and sort of almost picking a team that he thought the fans would want and trying to give some encouragement to people that way, because I think most of us had probably given up. And yeah, the first half of that Tottenham game was the West Ham of the previous season. Tottenham couldn't live with us. Obviously, Noble scored. Tevez finally scored with probably the greatest goal celebration of all time straight afterwards.
Well, let's talk about it, because, I mean, we do a thing on KUMB where we have a top 100 moments, and that regularly features in the top half whenever we rejig the chart, that Tevez celebration. Let's not forget, of course, now, was it 19, 20, 21 games he'd played without scoring prior to that?
Right. Yeah, I think 19. I think it was 19 games. Which is again amazing when you think of how it's remembered. The Tevez season, so many people put him in their best teams, and basically for a 9-game period.
Yeah, let's remember that, because we'll come back to that, I'm sure, later on. The fact that he hadn't scored for 19 games and hadn't been any sort of influence on the West Ham's fortunes whatsoever. You were a season ticket holder down in that corner, weren't you?
I was. I was. Yeah, I was a little bit higher up in the lower tier, so I couldn't get to him, sadly. But it was one of those moments where you're like, oh God, if he doesn't slow down, he might jump in. He has jumped in. I think I kind of laugh, because in reality, he probably should have been sent off. He committed about 6 different bookable offences in celebrating the goal. He took his shirt off. He jumped in the crowd. But it was one of the great moments, I think, and it summed up, I think, why he's still so fondly remembered. Because we were to him as he was to us. And I don't think you get many players in modern football that you feel like they love the fans as much as you love them. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean? I think
totally.
I think that's one of the reasons. I mean, obviously, we might talk about it, doing the crossed hammers every time he ever came back afterwards and stuff. I think it's things like that, which is why he's so remembered. And started with that goal celebration. And I think even though we lost the game, I think without that goal and that celebration, I don't think we stay up in it.
Yeah, it was certainly one of the most memorable moments of a season, absolutely filled with them. Talking about the crossed hammers, I recall him coming back with Man City a couple of years later. And my season ticket seat was right next to the dugout. And I remember him sort of doing that there and then sort of sheepishly looking round to see whether his manager at the time, whoever that had been, had actually seen him do it, But it was a fantastic moment, of course, an astonishing free kick. But we lost the game, didn't we?
Yeah. It went 2-2, I think 5-10 minutes, 2-2 quite early in the second half, and with 5-10 minutes to go, we all thought we had to win it. We were so far behind. I think it was 11 points at this point, with 10 games to go at this point. So we had, I think, 4 strikers on the pitch. Zamora makes it 3-2. Thank God we've done it. And then we somehow managed to find a way to lose it, which was incredible. I mean, Sky still showed the game to this day, as one of the great games. And I think I say in the book that even like Martin Tyler and Andy Gray, no West Ham affiliation at all. When Tottenham scored a winning goal, they both shout, "Oh no!"
Yeah.
Even they knew how unjust it was. I mean, we basically beat ourselves.
Yeah, I'm thinking in terms of 4-3s against Spurs, I probably prefer the one in the wind a few years earlier. Do you remember that? And
then
Harson, a couple of goals and an equally ridiculous but thoroughly enjoyable game. So anyway, there we were, but. As I said, a lot of people kind of took heart from the manner of that defeat. You mentioned there that, we'd played better in that first half than we had perhaps played since the previous season. And so it was to Blackburn we went with a reasonable amount of sort of enthusiasm, even though we were pretty much, cast adrift at that point, as you say, 11 points adrift of safety. And, it was almost a certainty, wasn't it? But I mean, that was after 29 games, I think, wasn't it? I think we had
29 games, yeah.
So
I think we had the entire top 6 to play in those 9 games as well.
Yeah,
that's forgotten,
Yeah, you were looking at that thinking that there's absolutely no chance of West Ham getting out of it. And I think you say also in the book that by that time, a lot of fans had sort of just chosen to enjoy what was going on, talking about the conga at Cheltenham. That sort of thing, because we were resigned to it. We knew we were going down. But of course, something quite dramatic happened in the next game at Blackburn, and another game that was on TV.
Yeah.
And of course, it was the first of 3 successive wins. I think it was.
It was 3 straight. Yeah.
But I mean, and of course, it was all rather lucky, wasn't it? Again, a real stroke of luck. Bobby Zamora equalised, I think, and then talk to me about the goal that Tevez. We all know what happened. Let's be honest. We all know Tevez stopped the ball from crossing the line, but somehow the linesman gave it.
It's a remarkable goal for it to hit someone on the line who's offside, not go in, and the linesman decided to give a goal.
Yeah, and you've got
thank God for no VAR.
Haven't you? In the book, you talk about why you think the linesman made that decision.
All I can think, Tevez had white boots on. And obviously, in jumping to avoid the ball, obviously his feet went behind the line. So I can only think the linesman saw a flash of white go over the line and decided it was the ball. I can't really work out. I'm trying to do him a favour because I can't think what else he saw.
It wasn't even close, was it?
No,
it was clearly
the ball was barely on the line, let alone over it. So. Yeah. But yeah, we'd had a fair bit of bad luck with some refereeing decisions that season. They say it evens itself out, doesn't it? So, and that gave us a first away win as well of the season, which you think that was late March or mid-March. I think we were the last team in the entire Football League to win an away game. So for people that were going week in, week out, I think they probably owed that bit of luck.
Definitely. Later that week, funny enough, I touched on it earlier, but I had the opportunity to interview Edgar Magnussen and we spoke about relegation. And I was sort of a bit perplexed when I asked him about the chances of West Ham staying up, expecting him to sort of be almost like resigned to relegation as Kirbishy was. But I was amazed because he was absolutely determined that we'd be staying up. The thought that West Ham might be relegated didn't even cross his mind. He was absolutely determined. No chance. And he was speaking sort of about next season, about all the players he was going to sign. And well, I mean, that's probably your second book, isn't it? What happened the year after?
Yeah. No, he always believed. I mean, he was either a very good poker player or really did believe, or maybe didn't want to believe it wasn't going to happen, I guess. But you're right. I do remember the interview you mentioned in question. I was reading the site, and he really seemed to think we would do it, and I think it was probably in quite a small minority at the time. But
very much so. Funny enough, it was also the interview from which he talked about the average West Ham fan earning £60,000, which obviously became something of ridicule for him for years to come after that. But anyway, West Ham back on track, first away win of the season, as you say, and then lo and behold, we're going to follow that up with I think you talk about it being one of the most comfortable wins of the season against Middlesbrough.
Yeah, just a nice routine 2-0 win, which we weren't doing. I don't think we'd done once that season. Every win kind of had some fights on a touchline, or as you say, or the captain having a go at the fans. And we just won a game the way you sometimes like to think you do. Kind of 2 early goals and saw the game out. And then all of a sudden, 11 points, I think, became 6. And 6 points can be workable. We did still have Arsenal and United and Chelsea to play, but 6 points, you can maybe do it. But we knew we needed a result in the next game, which was at the Emirates, and no one had got a result. Well, no one had won there at that point. So it still seemed a long way away.
I mean, for me, this is, if not one of the most memorable matches of that season. I mean, you mentioned in the book how we were the last team to win at Highbury, and then we go to the Emirates, and you've listed in the book every team that had played there since the stadium had opened and failed to win. I think the record was something crazy like 21 wins and 7 draws or something.
Yeah,
like that.
Yeah. Since we last won, because they hadn't lost at home since the previous January. I think it was 15 months since we'd won at Highbury. No one had beat him at the Emirates, and I don't think many people thought we were going to become the first. But somehow, through Rob Green, basically, we did.
Well, I mean, let's talk about that, because whenever anyone, not that it happens frequently, but should anyone ask me about the best goalkeeping performance I've ever seen, and we've spoken about it on the KUMB.com forum a few times in the past, for me, nothing can, has, or ever will surpass Rob Green's performance that day at the Emirates. I mean, what was it, 35 shots Arsenal had to have 1 or 2?
I mean, and at least 2 saves that didn't even make sense. They were that good. Like if they're on a computer game, you'd turn it off. You're thinking that you weren't, like, the game was cheating you. It's just a sensation. I mean, they really should have been 3-0 up within about the first 5 minutes. He'd made 2 saves in one-on-one situations in the first 5 minutes. I mean, Green was a fantastic keeper for us. And he says it's the best game of his career. So, and he had some good ones. I mean, we see him have plenty of good ones, penalty saves and what have you. So I think who are we to argue, really? But yeah, I can't think for West Ham or anyone of a better goalkeeping displayed in that game.
No, I totally agree. He was absolutely immense. And, you know, when people talk about certain individuals keeping West Ham up, I think, you know, if you were to look at a specific performance in that season and talk about one game, you know, that Robert Green, and of course everybody played well. It was a really incredible backs to the wall performance from West Ham. And let's not forget how good Arsenal were at the time. You know, we're not talking about the current Arsenal team. This is a team that weren't far off from being the Invincibles.
Yeah. Henry, Adebayor, Van Persie, Fabregas. I mean, it was a very, very strong team. Very strong Arsenal team.
Absolutely brilliant. But we beat them. And of course, all of a sudden, here we are now. So where are we? Let's have a look. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 games to go. All of a sudden, we're kind of within touching distance of you know, the rest of the league. All of a sudden.
Yeah, and then the next game is one of my favourites because only us in a run of 7 wins out of 9, greatest escape, could still find a way to actually lose 3-0 to our biggest rivals. in the middle of it, that's to me it actually makes it even crazier because you'd think, well, to stay up at a team's expense, you'd have to take points off them. In fact, we actually lost 3-0 to them as well, with Tevez playing, but obviously that wasn't an issue for them that day, was it?
Well, I mean, this is something you point out in the book. You know, Neil Warnock, there was no mention of Tevez's influence that day, was there, in the post-match press conference?
Came a bit after, didn't it?
It certainly did.
Strange.
Did. I mean,
he wasn't moaning when he missed a really good chance that day, for instance. He was perfectly fine to do that day. But yeah,
we were horrible that day. I didn't go to the game, but I was playing in a football tournament myself in the morning, and I was driving home and got hopelessly lost somewhere near Epping and had the game on the radio, and it was just goal after goal after goal. And you just thought, again, we were kind of back, weren't we, Dan, to thinking, you know, that's it. We can't, you know, go to Sheffield, lose, and especially as badly as that. It wasn't just the defeat. I mean, the goals difference, of course, you know, a 6-goal swing.
Yeah, massively, yeah.
Of that game.
Yeah, and our goal difference was already so bad after like the Reading game and the Charlton game, Bolton. That's 14-0. I've just described there. Yeah. But so we were almost a point worse than everybody else anyway because of that. And yeah, the manner of that defeat, and then the following game losing 4-1 at home to Chelsea as well, kind of ruled out any goal difference hopes because we were, I think, about 20 worse than everybody else at that point.
And of course, this was a Chelsea side. I think you described them in the book as that being one of their best teams in the last 20 years.
I would say probably their best in the time I've been watching. I mean, it's just because they've won the league since, you know, under Mourinho again and Conte. But that Chelsea team, it just felt like an absolute powerhouse, didn't it? Yeah. Like Drogba at his best, Robben, Ballack, you know, Terry, as much as I hate to say it, and Lampard, as much as I hate to say it, even more. But, you know, they just had massive players all over the pitch, didn't they?
They did. I mean, I've got the team here, just going through it, looking at it. Petr Cech, John Terry, Wayne Bridge, Carvalho, Essien, Lampard, Sean Wright-Phillips. Ooh, we can have a boo. Diarra, Kalou, Mikel and Drogba. What a team that is. What a team.
Sensational team.
Tevez scored, though, didn't he?
He did, yeah. And we didn't even play badly. It was just, you know, to this day, we all know if we play an absolute top team, if we play well, but they also play well, they win the game. And I think that was all it was that night. We needed them to have an off day and they didn't. But the problem was we were running out of time.
So back-to-back defeats again.
Yeah.
We lost at Sheffield, you know, prior to that. And, you know, we were pretty much at the stage where, you know, now we're looking at the table and thinking, you know, you've got to get a result in every single game here to sort of stand a chance. And as you said, you know, you mentioned a few minutes ago that most of those games were against tip-top opposition. We played Chelsea and Arsenal, and even the other teams that weren't, you know, challenging for the title, of course. And we all know what happened on the final day of the season. Teams like Bolton and Everton, they were doing very well that season. They were top half side, sort of challenging.
They came 5th and 6th that year. I think Everton came 5th, Bolton came 6th that year, which, you know, particularly with Bolton, it feels like a long, long time ago now. But that they were strong teams, you know, a couple of future West Ham managers in charge as well, both of them as well. So
yeah. So on to the next game, which was Everton, and Bobby Zamora come up trumps with one of the best goals of his career, really.
Yeah, I think one of the best goals for a lot of players' career, to be fair. It was so effortless. You wonder why he didn't do it every time he got the ball. Just kind of stood there, couldn't find a pass, just smacked it in the top corner. And then we held on. I mean, we were lucky that day in the sense. I think they lost Andy Johnson, who was their main forward. They lost him early. Mm-hmm. They didn't have a forward on the bench. So we managed to get through relatively comfortably, or as comfortably as we were ever going to. I think a little bit due to the injuries they had. But at that point, I think it was just a case of taking a win however you could do it. It certainly didn't matter how they came.
Yeah, so there we were. 3 games of the season left to play. Now, remind me, Dan, where were we at this stage in the season? Were we 19th at that point?
I think still 19th. Maybe it just shifted slightly up to 18th. But it was still a gap of, I think, 5 points to Sheffield United, to Wigan. And it was Wigan we played next. So essentially we were relegated in all but name if Wigan had beat us. And for us, I mean, every game was must win at this point now. So,
of course, before that game, there was a little case of a meeting at the FA. West Ham were playing Wigan on the Saturday up at the DW Stadium, as it's now known. But of course, on the Friday, 24 hours earlier, there was a meeting, and I recall at the time on KUMB when we were covering this, we all thought that was it for Tevez. We all thought it would be a case of West Ham would be told in no uncertain terms that Tevez could never play for the club, or at least for that season again until the contract situation had been resolved. But as it transpired, that's not how it turned out.
No, not 100% sure why that decision was made. I know that we were sort of blamed for it, but I'm pretty certain it wasn't us making it.
Well, you've got a theory about why that wasn't the case, and it's to do with the delay in that process, wasn't it? I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Well, it's essentially for me, I think the controversies that came afterwards obviously was partly down to everything that happened, but was also because they left the hearing so late, which I think was a conscious decision probably by the Premier League, because they thought we'd be relegated. Or nigh on relegated. When the charge came, I think, in late January, where we were already bottom. And I think they thought to leave it as late as they could, because third-party ownership was becoming a bigger thing across Europe. And this was like the first time of it really being a thing in the English game. The Premier League, I don't think, wanted it. And I think they saw it as a good chance to nail an already relegated team, 10-point deduction, never do it again, and it would stamp it out for everybody. But then we put a fly in the ointment by winning every game. so essentially then it became a relegation scenario. They would have to have any points deduction relegated us. If it was a 1-point deduction, that would have relegated us. We know how it ended up. So in the end, I think they just decided to not make that because they knew we'd appeal, because obviously who wouldn't? And then how long could that appeal process carry on? And don't forget, in the end, with everything, Sheffield United took West Ham to court. They didn't take the Premier League to court. West Ham would have taken the Premier League to court. And then what happens if that case goes beyond June, July? You can't release the fixtures because no one knows what league West Ham are in.
It was a complete mess, wasn't it? But it was essentially a mess of the league's own doing. It wasn't down to West Ham.
Well, I think and that's the argument to make. I don't necessarily even blame Sheffield United for doing what they did at the end. I think they just directed the anger at the wrong people. Because I think they left it that late thinking we'd be down. They could smack us with a big points deduction. No one ever does it again. I mean, part of in the judgment, it actually says, a quote in the book, that it references that it would have been really hard on the fans, which I understand that because I am a fan and it would have been really hard on me, but I'm not sure you can make decisions on that basis.
Absolutely bizarre. Absolutely incredible that was when that was included.
And then for whatever reason, I think late on the Friday night, a statement appeared on our site that said that Tevez could carry on playing for us, which I think is the other thing that, again, we're blamed for, where we were perfectly entitled to ask, but we probably should have been told no. It's not our fault that we weren't told no.
Yeah.
But, the Premier League's decision, I think, although it benefited us massively, to allow him to keep playing for us, I think in the end probably caused us as much harm as it did, as many problems rather as it did benefits.
Yeah, there was a rather sizable fine involved, wasn't it? I think 5.5 million was the figure. But it was determined that he wasn't an unregistered or an illegal player, despite the claims of the Sheffield United fans for years to come, actually. In fact, I think you still get people claim that Tevez was an illegal player, which was quite clearly not the case and confirmed by the Premier League. Importantly, no points deduction. Dave Whelan wasn't very happy, the Wigan boss, and quite ironically, in a sense, given that he was done for price fixing a few years later. But Dave Whelan, and there was like a little cabal of clubs, wasn't there, who again sort of seemed to suffer the gypsy's curse thereafter, because they were all relegated. I think Wigan, Fulham, Sheffield United, and Charlton,
they'd all gone
off the face of the earth within a couple of years. But I mean, Mr. Whelan wasn't happy, was he, at the Premier League's decision?
No, I pick apart one of his rants in the book, which is just, when I read it, it was just one of the most hilarious, just old man shouting at cloud rants I've ever heard in my life. Like, one of his issues that we weren't fined the full 38 million. I mean, we hadn't stayed up. I mean, what did he want? You can't necessarily. Oh, and also we received preferential treatment as to any other club, which I'm not sure in the history of football West Ham have been treated better than every other club, but according to Mr. Whelan, that was what they thought. But in reality, it was just it was a bad decision, I think, by the Premier League to leave it that late, which then created a lot of problems, more for us than them afterwards, which probably they weren't too bothered about. But it cost us a few quid in the end, didn't it?
It certainly did. And of course, the reason we're talking only about Tevez's involvement here is because Javier Mascherano had left the club during the January transfer window and gone to Liverpool, of course. Yeah,
which was actually how the charge came about, because Liverpool didn't know they weren't supposed to leave a bit of the agreement out. And when they were told they needed to, were quite confused, as obviously we hadn't left it out. And that was actually how the charge came about initially. One of the funnier things with Mascherano in the whole story is I think he only ever played 5 games for us. And then obviously went on to have a little bit of a career afterwards.
Yeah, I to this day, I feel incredibly sorry for Hayden Mullins, who was a really decent player for us. I think he was Pardew's, was he his first or second signing? I think he might have been his first.
I think he might have been his first,
took him on loan initially and then bought him the week after. But decent player for us. And of course, he'd already had that heartbreak of being ruled out of the cup final the year before. Being sent off against, was it Alonso, I think, got him sent off against Liverpool.
Garcia,
not Alonso. And of course, missed the cup final. And now here he was being blamed for, Mascherano having left the club because Pardew and then Curbishley had picked him, instead of the Argentinian. But so anyway, so it was just Tevez at the club by this stage, and So it was that we travelled to the northwest to Wigan with Carlos Tevez in the squad, and also with about 7,000 West Ham United supporters who had been given the opportunity to go free of charge.
Yeah, it's a nice little make good, I think, from some of the players after a few of the bad away displays. Yeah, they laid on coaches, and an absolutely great performance. It was a performance, I think, of the level we all kind of maybe expected when the two Argentines turned up, in terms of going to a place like that and just dominating. Tevez was outstanding, but was far from the only one. I think Benayoun had a great game. Everyone was playing well by that point. I think...
And of course, Luis Boamorte scored one of those rare goals in a West Ham shirt, didn't he?
I think we all thought it'd be the first of many. I think it was the first of 2, wasn't it, in the end?
Something like that.
Yeah.
But we were magnificent that day. Tevez absolutely terrorised them. Yossi Benayoun, I think it was incredible, and it was just a fantastic team performance. And we played them off the pitch. And if Dave Whelan, hadn't been angry enough 24 hours earlier, he certainly was by then, wasn't he?
Yeah, it was a nice little positive of the day. And even Paul Jewell got involved, the then Wigan manager, again, sort of saying that if this had been Wigan or Watford, then they'd have had points deducted, which is just rubbish, because any Premier League club that employs legal counsel would have been able to get done what we would have got done in terms of an appeal process. It doesn't matter who it is. Yeah. So, that whole kind of, if it had been us, this wouldn't have happened, never sat with me, to be honest.
Talking of the curse that I referred to there, wasn't Paul Jewell the manager who was depicted in one of the Sunday papers not long after that, being caught dogging? I think it
something like that. And then was the manager of that Derby team that
yes
he never won a game. I think he took over in November and didn't win a game. Which is incredible.
11 points. They
11 points, yeah.
Absolutely incredible. But yeah, so anyway, we move on to the last two games of what has already been a quite incredible season. And all of a sudden, us West Ham fans are sitting here looking at this thinking, hang on a minute, we might just do this. You know, we've got two games to go. And I think were we 18th that week? Or was it the following week we came out of the relegation zone?
We needed to win this to come out the relegation zone.
Okay,
we were
so
still
we were
in.
18th, having beaten Wigan. Sheffield United are 17th. Sheffield United, who, let's not forget, were 10 or 11 points clear of West Ham. With sort of 8 or 9 games to go in the season. And it was our final home game of the season. Now, you mentioned briefly earlier, and you touched on it quite a bit in the book, about, you know, we talk about players who had a real influence on West Ham's season that year. One of the players you refer to is Mark Noble. And you know, looking back, until I read the book, I hadn't realised that he hadn't really been involved at all in the team until sort of January, February, when Kirbishley brought him back in, almost as a last resort. It's like, who else have we got? And, you know, there's this young lad. And I recall him forming a really good relationship with Carlos Tevez. And, of course, in this game, that really showed, didn't it?
Yeah, I think this was the real... But Noble had played, obviously, a little bit when we were in the Championship and a little bit in the first year in the Premier League. But this was very much his kind of coming out party as a real force to be reckoned with for the club. And this day in particular, it was absolutely fantastic. And as you say, him and Tevez combined Tevez to Noble for the third goal. Obviously, in the Tottenham game, Noble had set up Tevez Tevez had set up Noble, rather, for that goal as well. But the Bolton game was sensational. I mean, again, as I said earlier, you thought you had to, you know, work very hard to beat that Bolton team. And any win was normally hard fought, scrappy. And we were 3-0 up in 25 minutes.
And let's not forget also that Bolton, at that time, I think it was probably the case for a lot of teams, because they were a decent, hard-working side, resilient, and they were one of our bogey teams. We always struggled. I think it's because they were strong and very much in that Allardyce mould of being quite a physical side. And, you know, for many years, I think West Ham teams failed to cope with that, didn't they? But, you know, that added onto it just made... And also the fact that the corresponding fixture had been the one that led to Pardew's demise. You know, it was such an incredible turnaround. And that day, I think it was a warm day, wasn't it, at the bowling? And it was just perfect. You know, it couldn't have gone any better.
Played so well. So there's a lot of parallels, I think, to the Watford game from last season. And again, another critical game. We were 3-0 up in that in half an hour. You know, Declan Rice and Souček and that. It reminded me a lot. Yeah, at the time, I hadn't long wrote about the Bolton game when I was watching that Watford game, so I saw a lot of parallels in it. But,
definitely.
Yeah, it was a fantastic day, and it meant for the first time it was in our hands. But it wasn't a very easy last game for it to be in our hands.
No, it wasn't, because we were going to face probably the best team in England, possibly Europe, and maybe even the world at that stage. Manchester United were standing between West Ham and the most improbable survival in Premiership or even possibly Football League Division 1 history. As Dan said there, you know, West Ham had escaped the relegation zone for the first time in a long, long time. We went into that game 17th, and it was still quite a difficult scenario to work out what we needed to do in order to survive. How can you sort of explain that relatively simply?
Essentially, we needed a draw. A draw would have kept us up. And if we lost, we needed Sheffield United to beat Wigan. It was as simple as that. If we lost, if we lost and Wigan got a result, we were down.
Because of course, to this day, the myth persists that Carlos Tevez scored the goal that kept West Ham in the Premier League. But of course, as we all know, we didn't need eventually
a 0-0 draw did us.
Exactly, we would have done. But anyway, we went to, I think it was at Sunday, wasn't it, the game?
Yeah, super duper Sunday, super relegation.
One of those
Sunday,
years when
they call it. Yeah,
that's it. Yeah, when they moved it all. So we all sort of traipsed up to Old Trafford. Now, you spoke in the book about how you'd been to the 2001 FA Cup Di Canio win.
Yeah.
I'd also gone that day, and this was my second trip to Old Trafford since then. Because unfortunately, I also attended the 2003 FA Cup match,
6-0,
in which we all kind of went up there thinking, you know, we'd beat them in the cup a couple of years earlier. Jermaine Defoe scored in a 1-0 win the following season up there under Glenn Roeder, and we thought, you know, this is going to be, you know, they say good things come in threes. And here we go. We all went up there full of enthusiasm, confidence. And of course, as you say, we got smashed 6-0 in what is often known as the, Gary Breen's finest hour for West Ham.
He set 4 goals up that day. He had a good game, didn't he?
He was fantastic, but just wearing the wrong shirt.
Yeah.
And I remember, to cap it all, I got a speeding ticket on the way home.
Oh,
I think
God.
I was doing 33 miles per hour in a 30-mile-an-hour zone. So that kind of catch up. But anyway, I was fortunate enough to be up there that day, and it was a very kind of, it was a strange atmosphere. We were all kind of confident. I'm sure this was exactly the same for everyone who was at home, but all the fans were really confident, but kind of, there's still quite a sense of trepidation, that this, after everything that we've done, after winning sort of, 6 from the last 8 games going into that one, that it could still all go wrong if the result went for us badly at Wigan. But as it turned out, it turned out all right. What was it like watching on TV? Because I mean, we were absolutely battered by Manchester United.
I remember
the KU Cup game.
Yeah, that's very true. They couldn't get out of our half that day, for particularly the entire first half. But yeah, I remember that day Sky had a lot of people watching this might remember, they had an option where you could split screen it. And all I saw for the first 20 minutes was United have shots on our goal and Wigan have shots at Sheffield United's goal, which obviously was the one team we needed not to win. Mm-hmm. So in the end, I turned off the split screen because I was sick and tired of it. I think Wigan did score and were 1-0 up. It just felt like inevitable that they'd score. I think Benny Hume cleared 2 off the line in quick succession. One that he had to rise pretty much just under the crossbar to head out a shot, I think, from Alan Smith. And I don't know how he did that, because I don't think I ever saw him win a header other than that, to be honest. He managed to do that one. And then, with one of similar to the game at the Emirates, one of our few breaks in the game, we managed to get it forward, and it was Zamora at the Emirates, and it was Tevez at Old Trafford.
I've never really considered that parallel, but I mean, it's absolutely spot on, because the goal arrived pretty much at the same time as well, didn't it?
Yeah, both were pretty much. If Tevez one, I think, was in first half injury time. I know for a fact Zamora's was.
Yeah,
and both times was the half winding down, and we kind of had like a token attack and managed to score a goal from it. And then that goal particularly was enormous, where we did only have to draw the game. It gave us a buffer.
Well, let me ask you about, because another thing that made me laugh in the book, in The Greatest Escape, is I think you mentioned that you got told off by your mum
for shouting too loudly. Yeah, 22 years old at the time, and got so carried away in the living room. My mum came downstairs and told me to shut up, which was nice of her. She'll deny it if she ever watches this, but she did. Yeah, she also called me off the street that night about midnight, because I was walking down the road singing "There's only one Carlos Tevez." But there's enough. That one I deserved. I'm not sure I deserved the first one, to be fair.
The thing I remember that most about that game, apart from the obvious things, the Tevez goal and the. You were at Old Trafford in 2001. You'll recall those celebrations where you started in a certain point, and by the time we'd finished celebrating the goal, you were kind of 9 or 10 rows further down. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do. Yeah,
with the whole 9,000 Hammers fans just kind of, it was like a crescendo sort of towards the front. It was exactly the same that day, and I think half time was pretty much over by the time we'd kind of returned to the seats we started in. But one thing that stood out for me at the beginning of that second half is the players were coming out of the tunnel, and you mentioned this in the book. The fact that Ferguson had decided to bring on, 3 of the greatest players not just in the Man U team, but in the Premier League and possibly world football at that time. And the Man U fans, to a man, 70,000, 75,000 of them, whatever the capacity was at the time, just chanted, "Send them down, send them down." And we looked down the tunnel and saw the likes of Cristiano Ronaldo coming out. Who were the other subs? I
think Scholes. I'm blanking on the other one. I want to say maybe Giggs. I think it might have been Giggs.
Let's have a look.
Yeah.
So it was definitely Ronaldo, because his stock was incredibly high at the time. And the other sub was, Giggs and Scholes and Ronaldo. 3.
To join Rooney and Solskjaer already on. So and then Warnock says we beat a weakened team. So
yeah.
while losing 2-1 at home to Wigan. Yeah.
Of course, while this was going on, I mean, those of us at the game, it was like the old days. I remember as a kid going over to West Ham and you'd have someone with a transistor radio, listening out to the scores. Back in the days when they had the halftime boards,
Yeah.
A to Z, and they put the scores up. But so the only way you could hear what was going on was via someone with a radio, and there was all these sort of whispers going around that Sheffield had scored and then Wigan had scored, and 1 minute we thought we were safe, and then we were thinking, it had all gone wrong, and meanwhile on the pitch they're absolutely battering us, where it's complete backs to the wall, but we did have a bit of a cushion, didn't we, knowing that as we said, we still could have afforded to concede one goal. But I think the point is the players on the pitch wouldn't have been aware of that at the time.
No. And I think as well against them, however late they'd scored the one goal, you wouldn't have bet against a second goal coming then quite quickly. God, how many times have we seen a Ferguson United team do that? So I think as late as it got, it was still an absolute knife edge. Graeme made a couple of great saves. One save from Ronaldo, which was as good as any save he made in the Arsenal game. But just in the Arsenal game, he made about 8 of them. My little boy still can't ever believe that we beat a team with Cristiano Ronaldo in it, to be fair. And I don't think I can a lot of days either.
I love that in the book where you talk about your boy, and even to this day, he can't believe that West Ham built it's CR7, I think you referred to.
CR7, yeah.
In two in the but that was it. We did beat them, and we hung on to survive, and it was, I think, without any shadow of a doubt, the greatest escape. There's been a couple of attempts at it more recently. I think, was Sheffield involved, or Wigan? One of them a couple of years later, perhaps Wigan.
Leicester had a really good goal.
Leicester.
And then won the league a couple of years after, which sadly we didn't manage. But
no, unfortunately, all that happened to West Ham a couple of years after was that after all that, we were relegated.
Yeah,
weren't we?
We got relegated anyway, yeah.
But coming back to the book, we'll touch on the fallout from that in just a minute. But I was sort of wondering while I was reading how you remembered everything that had gone on, because as I say, it was a season that I kind of feel was memorable, but a lot of the games I couldn't even remember. A lot of the goals I was reading in the book. In terms of your research, did it take a lot of going to YouTube or looking at the season reviews and going through that and looking at websites and stuff?
Yeah, websites. Yeah, my other half bought me the season DVD review, which was very nice of her. That really was a good point of reference. I've always had quite a good memory of where I was watching games, like sporting games. Like, she's baffled because different sport, but like the 2005 Ashes series of cricket, I can remember what I was doing pretty much any day's play. I don't know why, it's just a weird memory thing I've got. So that helped. And then, just a mixture of a few sites, your own site a couple of times as well. YouTube, your various articles, and just, piecing it together in my mind in terms of, the emotions you felt at the time. And I say the last few games were quite easy because they're quite memorable. And a few of them I tried to blank out quite a bit, to be honest.
Dan, what was your overriding emotion at the final whistle at Old Trafford? Were you sort of, overjoyed, or was it just like a question of relief, really?
Disbelief, I think, to be honest. I never thought we'd do it, if I'm honest. I think there's that old phrase, it's the hope that kills you, isn't it? Which I've had a couple of times since supporting this club. But I think that was my overriding thing. I kind of always thought it was too good to be true. I couldn't believe that we'd actually do what we needed to do. So the fact we did it, and then it was an overwhelming feeling of we need to make sure this doesn't happen again. And I think I say in the book, and it didn't ever happen again for 3 years, and then it did. That's his life.
As I say, maybe that's another book. But of course, there were ramifications for West Ham United once the partying had ended, and everyone had gone home, and the cool light of day set in, and all that. There was the fact that Sheffield United had been relegated, and Mr. McCabe and the rest of his people weren't about to sit down and accept the fact that it had been played out on the football pitch, but they wanted revenge, and it took a while. Took a few cases, took a few tribunals, but they got there in the end, didn't they?
Yeah, well, I think they must have paid so much in legal fees. I think probably the solicitor was pretty part owners of the club by the end of it, to be fair. But they're just the old adage of just try again, and you'll find someone on a bad day who makes a bad decision. And I think that was what it was. We shouldn't have done, the Tevez thing. We deserve to be punished for. I have no problem in saying that. We weren't allowed to do what we did to sign the 2 players, but in my opinion, as I mentioned earlier, I think in the end we were basically punished because the Premier League set the trial date too late. And then obviously one judge that decided that Tevez was the only reason we'd stayed up, which the picture behind you there, I think there are quite a few people in that picture that were reasons that we stayed up, not just not just him. I think 1 to 11 to do what we did. I think Tevez, I'm saying this off the top of my head, I think Tevez might have scored 5 goals in those 9 games. He certainly didn't score all of them. Without the Zamora goal against Everton, without Green's performance at Arsenal, without Ferdinand and Collins and Lucas Neal playing so well at the back on the last day, you don't stay up. And yeah, I rant about it quite a lot in the media. But
the point is, Dan, I mean, the notion that one player can be responsible for a team's fortunes is just, it's nonsense. I mean, we all know it's nonsense. And even to this day, I can't fathom out how Lord Griffiths came to the conclusion with, let's not forget the aid of the likes of Henry Winter, who I must confess I was most disappointed with the club invited to write for the website some years later, given what he'd done in terms of getting the club relegated. But it was
campaign for fairness and all that nonsense.
Well, I mean, Sean Bean, yeah, I mean that
Sean
nonsense
Bean,
it all was. The walk on Downing Street. How does it? Do you think about that when we play Sheffield United these days? Does it still rile you that does it mean something special still when we when we beat them 3-0 the other night?
Yeah, I had an issue with them for quite a while afterwards. I think a lot of us did, but it kind of dulled because we didn't play them for years, did we? After, because obviously they
cup, wasn't it? I think
once in the cup they went down and they didn't come back for a long time, did they? I think it's almost become one of those things now that a lot of people do the Tevez joke without almost realising what they're doing. Do you know what I mean? I think he'll always be around now because it's a little bit Pavlovian. But they don't bother me massively now. I won't say I'm not finding it quite funny to see what's happening to them this season. And I think a lot of us are probably doing the blame Tevez joke a little bit. But obviously it looks like
it's still there, isn't it?
They're going to be relegated this year through nothing to do with us other than taking 6 points off them. But I did harbour a fair bit of ill will for a few years, not because of them necessarily having an issue with it, but I think just the steps they took to kind of try and get some compensation from West Ham directly, I thought was ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah. And of course, I mean, the Pink Palermo, who is one of our contributors on the Eyes Up Mother Brown show, where we do the live commentary, he has a theory that all the club's current ills, and I don't know where you stand on the current board, but in his eyes, he doesn't view them particularly favourably, and his view is that every problem at the club now stems from that adjudication with regards to Tevez that summer. The fact that we were forced to pay £25 million, I think it was, Scott Duxbury said, in compensation. And then, of course, we had the only billionaires in the world that went bankrupt. I mean, if you're talking about it could only happen at West Ham.
Yeah.
Perfect example. Onto, the new owners coming in and the current problems. Well, do you sort of have some sympathy with that viewpoint? Or
yeah, I think it's a very interesting point, to be honest. I think in another way as well, it kind of tarnished the club's reputation for a few years also.
Well, that's a really key point. Yeah, because until then, West Ham had been in a lot of football fans' eyes, their second club. There was always that thing.
Yeah.
I always think that was primarily because we were crap generally, and it was, as Shankly said, I think, nice team, easy 2 points, or I paraphrase. But it certainly changed after the Tevez situation, didn't it?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think the two things put together, I think is a quite a fair summation, to be honest. I think there's definitely some theory to that, because I mean we were still paying that off when the current owners came in, weren't we? Mm-hmm. And obviously over a time as well, where the club was in massive trouble financially, having after the Icelandics did go bust. So I think there's I don't disagree with it. Put it that way.
Maybe again more for I mean, in terms of where do you go from here? I mean, the book. Let's hold it up again, because I do love the cover. The Greatest Escape by Dan Hurley, the craziest season in West Ham's United history. Any plans for a follow up, Dan? I mean, of course, I know this is still new,
potentially. I've got a couple of ideas. The process has been surprising in terms of this. When I sat down to write it, this wasn't necessarily where I thought it'd end, but I love that it has. It's been so enjoyable and kind of connecting with a lot of people on social media, like West Ham fans and stuff. And the fact that people have been interested and wanted to read something that I've done genuinely means a hell of a lot. Mm-hmm. So it's been a really enjoyable process, like even getting to speak to people like Bianca Westwood and people like that involved with the club who've enjoyed the book and stuff, which has been like really cool. Literally was talking about this yesterday, but yeah, I've got some ideas for potentially another one.
Anything you want to give away, or is it all kind of top secret?
Yeah, I'm not sure enough about it yet.
Okay.
But
we'll
yeah,
keep
but
an eye on
like,
it and see
people
what happens.
seem to have enjoyed the style in terms of how I've described the games. I've tried to not be overly serious because at the end of the day, it's a description of a game of football 15 years ago. So I'm trying to not really have it too serious a read. But people seem to have quite liked the way that I've described some of them. So maybe I'll look at a book, maybe describing some other games in a similar way and go from there.
Yeah, I as I said earlier, I really enjoyed the style in which.
I really appreciate it.
There's a lot of humour in there as well, which, I mean, let's be honest, to endure a season such as we did that year, you needed an element of humour about the whole situation. But in terms of the process of writing, was this your first book that you'd written?
It was, yeah.
And how did you find that whole process?
I really enjoyed it. It sort of became, completely honest, I had no idea how long it would take when I started it. I didn't know I'd finish it. I wanted to. But by the end, it was kind of 3 to 5 hours a day, sort of 5-6 days a week in the afternoons, sitting writing or researching. My kids got really involved with it, wanting to know how I was getting on. My other half, Kate, I think, had to read the thing about 6 times in the end because I kind of used her as an editor while she was furloughed as well. It was a really enjoyable process. It became almost like on days I wasn't doing it, I would look forward to doing it again, like in terms of writing and stuff. So it was a really, really enjoyable process. And I think something that maybe a lot of us have kind of had to find over the last year is maybe sort of have a chance to invest in a passion a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Mine's vegetables, which is the garden seems to be coming on all right. In terms of working with Pitch Publishing, how did that link come about?
I had them recommended as a really strong publisher of like independent books and one that might take a chance on like a more inexperienced author or a more of a niche idea. And had some really good conversations with the guys there. And yeah, they were really supportive and they've been great, to be honest. Really helpful and kind of helped guide me along the process and stuff. And yeah, put together the quite cool front cover that I know you're a fan of. And
I love it.
Yeah. They've been a pleasure
I do love
to
a
work
bit
with.
of pixel art, so I'm a big fan of that. Okay, well, Dan, listen, thank you. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
No, thank you. Loved it.
About, as I say, it was the very best of seasons and the very worst of seasons all rolled into one. And I don't think any of us who lived through it will ever forget it. Before we do go, of course, this is your opportunity to give the book a plug. I shall hold it up here so everyone can see the cover while you tell everyone how they can get it, how much it is, and those kind of things. Yeah,
well, I think it's retailing around sort of, I don't want to quite an exact price because different sites have it at different things, but I think you'll probably be able to find it for around £14 on most sites. It's on a site I think certain Prime members get a benefit from. The publisher site is pitchpublishing.co.uk. And then the book's on their shop. And that also will link you to everywhere the book's being sold in the mainstream. So we are on Amazon, we're on WH Smith, Waterstones and what have you. I'm also on Twitter. The book has a specific account, which is at greatest@ESC. So at greatest@ESC. And yeah, any messages you ever want to send me on there, I'll do my best to reply. I've got a few people now that kind of are reading it and ask me various opinions every day, which is an absolute pleasure, to be honest, to be able to do that. So yeah, if either of those things really, I believe it's available on most major sites. So yeah, if you want to have a read of it, if you'd like a signed copy as well, please feel free to DM me on Twitter. I'm more than happy to do that. Yeah, and I just really, really appreciate the fan base, kind of getting involved with it. It's been great to see, really has.
Brilliant. Perfectly done, my eyes. There is The Greatest Escape, the craziest season in West Ham United's history by Daniel Hurley. On sale now, available in all good bookshops, or at least those you can access at the moment. Anyway, yeah. Of course, available online. Dan, as he said, we'll send you a signed copy if you want to apply directly to him. Dan, did we get your Twitter address in there?
Yeah, at Greatest ESC.
At sorry, yes, you did say at Greatest ESC. That's just about it. Dan, it's been, as I said, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I wish you the greatest of success with the book. I hope you sell lots and lots of copies. Because
thank you very much. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, it's a pleasure, and as I said, I've read every page, and I thoroughly enjoyed the book, and some of it anyway. I mean, the bits about losing at Bolton and those sort of things, I'm not sure, but a good reminder nonetheless. So, Daniel, the very best of luck, and thank you for taking the time to talk to us today on KUMB TV.
Thanks very much, Graeme.